Hey, this is Ina, in with you in the fight back. Today I want to talk about probably the most comprehensive Maoist critique of Soviet-style socialism, and that is Class Struggles in the USSR by Charles Bettelheim. And I'm only going to talk about the first book, and there are actually 4 volumes, only 2 of which have been published in the United States. The others, I believe, are only in French and not readily available. Charles Bettelheim was a French economist. He was an advisor to Che Guevara and Nasser, and he was also a prominent Maoist. And Bettelheim undertook this work after the shock of the Prague Spring in 1968, and by the mid-70s it had been published. Now this work covers from 1917 to 1923. So roughly to the end of the Lenin period. And unlike Mao's critique of Soviet economics, which was not really a historical summation of the Soviet Union, Bettelheim's work is, and for any serious revolutionary, it's a work that you really should look at. Because opposed to how Maoists, as opposed to Mao, tend to trace, not always of course, but tend to trace restoration of capitalism in the Soviet Union to 1956. Bettelheim starts at the beginning, and he identifies a major problem in the ideology of the Bolshevik Party, which had come out of the Second International, and that was economism. Economism is, it sees only the productive forces as the driving forces of history. So really just the economy, just the base. It only sees those economic contradictions in the class struggle, and it tends to promote a narrow focus on the working class. So we're really not looking at the peasants, we're really not looking at politics and culture, we're not looking at the superstructure, or rather we're not looking at the totality of it all. And Bettelheim says that this focus shaped a lot of what the Bolsheviks did, and what you need is not just to change the legal relations. For instance, a revolution occurs, and a new state, a new system of laws and whatnot is put in place, and it says the workers control this factory. And those are the legal outward relations. But inside, those production relations may or may not reflect those legal relations. On the inside, it could still be a commandist bureaucratic economy with a boss at top, workers on the bottom, and no workers control the means of production. What Bettelheim is saying, it's not just about the productive forces, but also about changes in the superstructure. You need politics. You need politics and command, because it's not enough to just say the workers own that factory. You have to, inside that factory, it has to be workers' control. In actuality, those relations of production must exist. And he's saying that because of this economism, the Bolsheviks, with the partial exception of Lenin, were not really able to look to challenge politics, ideology, and culture that were either bourgeois or pre-bourgeois and that survived in the superstructure. These relations of production, what are we talking about? Solidarity, a communal form inside a factory, workers' control, or are we talking about bureaucratic commandists? Are these relations of production, these determine the direction in which a determinate social formation is involved. So, to put it in layman's terms, if you have solidarity, relations of production that are socialist and that are cooperative, that are trying to break down the barriers between mental and manual labor, then you're moving in a socialist direction. If, on the other hand, you're having commandist, bureaucratic, you're having all sorts of the old habits of the bourgeois, even though the factory on the outside may say this is a socialist factory, you're moving in a capitalist direction. And again, it's not enough to seize factories and have new legal relations. Workers have to be in command. And you can't just have that outward appearance. What is essential is the essence of what's in that factory. Are the workers in control? And again, bourgeois relations. Is the law of value being reproduced? because if those survivals in the superstructure survive, they're going to, the determinant agents, the workers, and perhaps the administrators in that factory are going to be determined by them, and they will reproduce the law of value, command as methods. Or on the other hand, and it shouldn't just be about abolishing the law of value to stroke, but trying to phase it out as through class struggle. And socialist relations are not just something imposed from above. They are conscious. Workers' control is a conscious act. It's politics and command, and it's showing that socialism is being constructed. Now, Bettelheim recognizes that the Bolsheviks were pioneers. They made mistakes. They had economism. Yet they had to survive in some horrible conditions of the revolution and civil war. Yet, I believe he's posing the question, in a sense, was their victory a defeat? Because he looks at the development of a state bourgeoisie that's developing within a nationalized economy as opposed to a U.S.-style economy of private enterprise. And he's saying that part of the former bourgeoisie and those survivals in the superstructure were infiltrating the state and administrative machine during the war communism period. Again, this is a very tense period for the Bolsheviks. And again, they bring in their bourgeois practices and their mode of operation, and they produce and reproduce those relations. So instead of producing workers' control relations, socialist relations were reproducing commandist methods, bourgeois methods. And due to the conditions of the Civil War, the specialists who were recruited by the Bolsheviks, military officers, managers, they have these old ideological practices, and it's done in the army, it's done in education, so it's hard to move in that socialist direction. And because of this, the old relations are not really tackled. You need class struggle. You have to have workers in control, and this is not just in the administration of factories and in the army, but it's in the party as well, and of course in the countryside. So Bettelheim does make a critique of how Trotsky created the Red Army, saying it was based more on a traditional army as opposed to Mao's People's Liberation Army, which was actually a very interesting critique, I might add. I can't possibly go over all the themes and questions posed in this book, but you can read the link below, which has the book, Volume 1, and Volume 2 is on the same page. But before I finish, I wanted to talk about, for me, what was a very interesting portion of this, which was what Bettelheim was saying about Lenin and Neff. Remember, war communism, civil war devastates the country. Russia needs to rebuild, so Lenin has a retreat to semi-market relations of the new economic policy. And he dies several years after. Well, Bettelheim is offering a very interesting critique, or an interesting interpretation of Lenin that goes past what I believe, for the most part, had been advocated. I think Moshe Levin was moving in this direction too in his work, Lenin's Last Struggle. Bettelheim is saying that Neff is not merely a retreat, not just to be about rebuilding the economy, but he's looking how to forge a socialist state as opposed to a czarist one. He wants to forge that worker-peasant alliance. And he wants to know how workers can lead the peasants. How can they go together this socialism? And he's saying that Lenin, in his last works on cooperation and some others, was looking at the development of the mass line, from the masses to the masses. This real fusion of party and workers. And he's saying that Lenin urges changes in productive relations in factories, in the state, and he wants control of the masses. He wants the masses to be in control over the state and of the party. So, a lot different than what we normally get on Lenin. And he's urging cultural development of the peasants, of the workers, and he wants to get rid of pre-bourgeois habits in the peasantry, the serf relations, the serf habits that had carried over from feudalism. And later, he's urging not just to get rid of this, but to have a cultural revolution, or at the very least, moving in that direction. And he's saying that Lenin is saying, because of through the mass line, through a cultural revolution, that the peasant is not merely an ally of the proletariat in the democratic bourgeois revolution to develop capitalism, but is also an ally in the socialist revolution. And to do this, you need a remolding of world outlook. Workers and peasants are fusing together, control of the state by the masses, and it's really a new strategy. And it doesn't get picked up because a lot of the party activists didn't, whether Trotsky, Bukharin, or Stalin, didn't really understand this new line Lenin was advocating, and he did die before it could be fully elaborated. On the one hand, I think Bettelheim is maybe reading a little too much of Mao in Lenin and almost wishful thinking, but this is a very novel interpretation of Lenin, and it really changes, or it should change, a lot of views on how the Soviet Union developed, the possible avenues open to it. And again, this work is a very high-level Maoist critique of Soviet-style socialism. It's very difficult to read, and I just hope these notes have provided some foundation for any future readers. Anyway, this is Ina. Until next time.